Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas Touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Welcome, one and all, to the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me, as always, is the walking miracle, Mark Tipton.
The walking miracle. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the introduction. Once again, I'm not sure I could quite live up to those accolades, but I will certainly try my best as the co-host. And what I would like today is this is going to be an episode that's very interesting to me personally. This is a subject that I don't have any first-hand knowledge of. This is something, I coming from the perspective of a fan, really doesn't know a lot about this, so I get to kind of pick your brain a little bit here, and I'm looking forward to do it because today's subject is on training and how one prepares to become a professional wrestler and everything that goes into it. Would you like to, kind of give an opening overview of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. Training obviously is a huge aspect of our business. Either the multitude of training or the lack of training that a lot of people have, and different things that you learn and how you get there. So we run a training school, obviously, here at Pro Wrestling Mid-South, the Pro Wrestling Mid-South Academy, and we're very proud of those who complete the training. And complete is a big word in that. We're looking forward to talking about training today, looking by giving people a little bit of insight of, what it takes to be a professional wrestler and maybe follow your dream.
Well, I guess, kind of begin with square one is I'll try to do it is what comes to my mind is I think, well, where in the world do you begin of all the various facets? And let me just say off the top, I think professional wrestling is something that what professional wrestlers are asked to do is really not valued the way it should be. We ask them to do a great many things. They have to speak on the microphone and give orations like an actor and perform in the ring as an athlete. We ask them to do a wide variety of things. And so I'm wondering, where do you even start to train someone to do this?
And it's always been kind of a close hold kind of thing. Especially I got started, in the late 90s, early 2000, and it was almost still at that point where it's almost like you felt like you needed a secret handshake to get going. You know what I mean? Of course, a lot of that has fallen by the wayside over the last 20 years with the internet and Facebook and things like that. You can find wrestling trainers. I personally, here at the Academy, we get 3 to 5 messages a week kind of, inquiring about wrestling training. Now, very few of those people follow through, a very, very small percentage. So I'd say roughly about 9 out of 10 people that actually come here and go through day one of training, 9 out of 10 of those people never come back after day one. And that's kind of a point of pride with me because we're trying to protect the business. We want people to understand that this isn't a walk in the park. This isn't easy. Like I said before, I've played every sport imaginable, and this is the toughest thing by far that I've ever done. And the fact that there's no off season, it's continuous, and you never stop learning, and that's part of the training as well. So the first thing you do is you have to try to find someone reputable, to train you. And I've heard a lot of people say, don't go to anyone that hasn't made a living in professional wrestling. And that's a good rule of thumb. I'm not going to discredit that. There is a little bit more to that we'll probably get into a little bit later. But that's a good rule of thumb. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because they made a living at it means that they're good trainers, though. I've always considered myself kind of a student of the game, that kind of thing. I've looked at every aspect of professional wrestling. You have to have that coach's mentality. I played basketball all through school. There was one point in my life that I wanted to be a basketball coach, and I eventually got to do that through youth leagues and things like that here in the area. But you have to have that coach's mentality, because that's what you are. You're a coach, you're a leader, you're guiding people through this process. So the first thing you do is you just try to find someone reputable and also someone honest that's not looking to just take your money, but someone that's honest that's actually going to take care of you as a person, not just an athlete.
All right. Well, one other thing that came to mind when I started about this is at the very beginning, I'm sure you mentioned how there's a great deal of interest, but people don't want to follow through. And I suspect that's true of other areas of endeavor, because when they find out what's really involved in the process of becoming a professional wrestler, they probably think twice about what it is. But one of the things I want to know is, I'm sure when someone comes in the door for the first day, they probably think, well, I'm ready to jump right in the ring. And what came to mind is, do you start right off in the ring, or is there in effect a classroom portion where you go through and kind of introduce them and kind of get them going in that way before they ever step into the ring itself?
More or less, I give them a talk first. Obviously, the first thing I've kind of got, and this has happened over the last couple of years, is I tell them, whatever you think you know about professional wrestling, I want you to check it at the door, because at this point right here, you know absolutely nothing. And that's just from my own personal experience. When I got into wrestling, I thought I knew. I loved professional wrestling so much, I watched it all, and I thought I had it figured out. And like I said before, I took that first bump, and I realized exactly how wrong I was about everything, right? So that's kind of what I do with the guys. I talk them. I tell them, hey, this is a commitment. You know what I mean? This is not something we can do in 3 weeks. It usually takes me somewhere between 6 months and a year to get someone match ready, and so I tell them, you have to come. We hold 2 training sessions a week right now, so they have to come. They can come to one or both, but it just means you learn one thing every training session, right? And I actually have a curriculum that I've created from my many years of experience training under Dr. Tom and just different ones over the years that I've trained with. So I've taken a little bit from everybody and kind of created our own melting pot of professional wrestling to what I feel that they will best serve them for the future. I've said it, I probably said it a dozen times already on the podcast. It's, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man a fish, feed him for a lifetime. We're teaching them how to be professional wrestlers. We're not teaching them how to mimic professional wrestling. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to give them a good base on everything. So when they walk in the door, I tell them, obviously check whatever you think you know. This is what's going to happen. But yeah, first thing, day one, is flatbacks or squat bumps, is what we do. And that's the only thing they do on day one. And a squat bump is pretty much 90% of all bumps in professional wrestling. When you take a clothesline, a back elbow, drop kick, everything is pretty much a variation of that bump, right? It's to land flat, stand there on your own, and be able to do it, so, and they do a lot of them that first day. And that's where the 9 out of 10, don't come back, because after they do that for a couple hours, it's like they've been in a car wreck, and rightfully so. I mean, that's kind of the equivalent to it. They feel like they've been in a car wreck, their neck's all jarred, they're sore in places they didn't know existed, things like that. So, yeah, we're very meticulous on that. We want to keep everyone safe. We want to keep everyone, make sure they don't get injured, but we also have to let them know, hey, listen, this isn't a joke. This isn't game time. We take this stuff very seriously, and we need you to take it seriously too, because in essence, anytime you backdrop somebody, anytime you suplex somebody, anytime you do anything to anyone, you basically have their lives in your hands, and that's a very real thing that they need to understand.
Well, that as I was listening to you talk, what I almost heard you say is, we have talked about how people have misconceptions about professional wrestling, and I guess what puzzles me and what interests me about this is the mindset people come in the door with. And I guess one thing is, do people who begin training, do they in effect have to go through an unlearning process? Do they have to go through and learn, hey, all the things I thought I knew, I have to, you have to almost get that out of them. Like they think, lots of us, hey, ego is what it is. Some of us feel like we have it all figured out. And you mentioned that happened to you. Do you almost have to unlearn what you think you know about professional wrestling? Is that a difficult process?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people come in with a very, like I said, they think they know. So there's lots of people that they grow up idolizing and things that that they think they know about professional wrestling, and it's almost like you're stripping all that away, and you're showing them why that doesn't work, or why you can't be that, or why that doesn't work. That kind of thing. So you have to start from scratch. You hit the nail on the head for sure. Is you have to unlearn so many things of what you think you know about professional wrestling. You know what I mean? So when they come in the door, it's it's almost like a culture shock. You know what I mean? Because, and like we said this before, WWE has created this mentality that everything's phony, everything's a movie, everything's fake. Ergo, every decision is arbitrary. And that's kind of what they feel about professional wrestling, that there is no wrong. There's only right, because it's quote unquote an art form, right? So like they come in with this mentality that they can do no wrong, that if they wanted to, that a dick flip is okay. You understand? Or all these things are just part of the overall, story arc of professional wrestling, ergo. But that's not what we do here at all. And that's not what, that's not how you were originally trained, 30 years ago either. To me, like I said before, the most successful time wrestling was, the 70s and the 80s, because to me it was a perfect blend of sport yet entertainment, right? So like to me that was the pinnacle of what we're doing. So that's what we try to do. We try to give these people a good base of, hey, this is professional wrestling, this is what it means, this is what it's about, this is what we're trying to project as a company and as talents and everything else. So getting them to unthink all those things and kind of get them to come over to my side on a lot of things is hard. Like, and we've had plenty of guys. One of my students, he said the same thing. He said, "Man, I thought I knew everything about professional wrestling until I started talking to you, and I realized how much I didn't know." And he said, "You've changed my thought process on everything when it comes to professional wrestling," and that's good to hear, because because that's what I want. I want to create as many of these guys that we can. So when the day comes that I can't do it anymore, we still have someone out there teaching these things in the business.
All right. Well, as you mentioned the WWE and their effect, the WWE does something, and other promotions do it to a lesser extent, but something WWE has done for many years that has really puzzled me is when they bring a new prospective professional wrestler in, they don't necessarily do it from someone who has a background in professional wrestling. They will often reach out to people who are successful in athletic fields. Now, the ones that come to mind is Kurt Angle is going to come to mind for me first. Here's one who had, as he, proudly proclaims, won a gold medal with a broken freaking neck in the Olympics. He had a tremendous background in amateur wrestling, but to my knowledge, prior to his signing with the WWE, had never set foot in a pro wrestling ring. And there are other examples, although he's one of my favorites. And on the other hand, they also sign people with extensive backgrounds in professional wrestling outside of WWE. And so I wonder, do you almost have to approach it from an individual aspect as where their background is coming from to get them into where you want them to be in their perspective professional wrestling? Excuse me. Professional wrestling.
Yeah, WWE's mindset is, obviously they want to take whoever they think is viable, because they're going to teach them the WWE style, is what they call it, right? They're going to teach them the WWE way. And there's lots of guys that, like you said, that were, former NFL players, things like that maybe they didn't make the cut in the NFL, and, they think they could excel at professional wrestling. And while I don't have a problem with that mindset, for me and our company, my mindset is I want someone that is fanatical about professional wrestling, because to me, the greatest wrestlers come from the greatest wrestling fans, right? I was a huge wrestling fan my entire life, right? So I had a huge passion for professional wrestling. Now, WWE has all the money in the world, so they can pay guys to kind of stick around and cash checks and do what needs to be done. But for me, it's more of a thing of, hey, we're going to ask you to do a lot of things, where there's no money involved, there's no glory, there's no anything involved for you except for the love of professional wrestling. So if I were to go out and say try to recruit a guy that has this extensive athletic background, the first bump in the road he would quit. You know what I mean? We spent time and effort doing this. Now we do have guys that come in that have both, that have an interesting athletic background and also have love for professional wrestling. And what I try to do with that is I try to connect with them on that level. We've had plenty of guys that were football players. So I try to, if they're not getting something, if they're not getting the rolls right or they're not getting tree falls right or something like that, I try to liken it to something in their respective fields, to try to make them understand what it is, right? But everything we do has a reason, and that's been part of the thing too. So for me, like I said, it's just I want guys that love professional wrestling and can't see them doing anything else, because the passion of professional wrestling is to me is the core of everything.
All right, now you used the word style, and that kind of caught my attention. Obviously, WWE, they want to prepare someone to appear on WWE television eventually at some point. That's obviously their goal. That's what they're all about. But as we've discussed, historically speaking, let me say it that way, that different promotions have had different styles. There have been some styles that are more amateur wrestling based. We had Memphis that was known as, kind of the blood and guts, I think was the phrase you used before when we described it. And then, of course, WWE has its made-for-TV style professional wrestling. And I'm curious, when you think about training people, do you think that, should they get a more all-around perspective of these different styles to prepare them for going into being a professional wrestler and the different styles they may be asked to exhibit in the ring? Or do you think it's more specific to focus on one, the way the WWE does? And the way they do it, are they in effect doing their talent a disservice the way they train them?
Very good question, Mark Tipton. That's why you're the walking miracle. So my thought process is that no matter what you're talking about professional wrestling, every style, the core basis for it is all the same. You understand? It's still to get over. And then we've seen this in every company, every corner of the world, every whatever. It's love this guy, hate this guy, right? Love and hate. So what we teach here is that basic core thing. We teach guys how to be heels. We teach them how to be baby faces, true heels, because they can literally take that style or that mindset anywhere in the world and it's going to work. You understand? And people are saying, it doesn't work in Japan. Well, we just saw Chris Jericho do it in Japan a couple years ago, didn't we? He went in, sneaked attack Omega, got color on him, beat up an announcer, and had actual wrestling heat in Japan in 2018 or whatever it was, right? 18, 19, I can't remember exactly what year it was. But it worked, and it's worked everywhere we've ever tried it. Guys, like I said, all these people, old school doesn't work anymore. No one wants to see that garbage, blah, blah, blah. And then every time we give them old school garbage, it lights the internet on fire. You know what I mean? Cody and Dustin. You know what I mean? Probably one of the best matches of the last 10 years. Right? Not a huge fan of Cody Rhodes right now for several reasons, but that match in particular was one of the best matches of the last 10 years. Right? And what was it? It was an old school brother versus brother, blood, drama, that kind of thing. It was as old school as it gets. So, yeah, what we do is I teach them what they need to succeed, not just for my company and what we're doing here, but in my opinion, what they would need if they could go anywhere else. And then they can adjust their styles a little bit within the confines of whatever. Even Lucha. You understand? Even Lucha Libre, there's still – you can still be a heel in Lucha Libre. You can still be a heel in Canada. You can still be a heel in Japan. You can still be a heel at even some of these smart mark promotions where it seems like everybody knows what's going on. But the minute you don't treat them like they know, and the minute you give them a heel moment, they react, right? So it all works. You understand? So Yeah, the WWE, they teach a television style because that's what they're producing, and they don't care about what the guy does after WWE. So they're going to be producing television no matter what. So they're going to teach the guy how to have TV matches, and that's just the way they do it. We've seen several of these guys. We'll say Drew McIntyre is a very good example. He was taught TV matches, and he kind of fell off the radar with WWE, so they released him, right? And he went out and became this independent, juggernaut, where he was going to all these towns and working his ass off and getting over with old school professional wrestling. And then he said it himself, like, it all clicked. All the things that The Undertaker was telling him all those years, all of a sudden he started understanding, he started getting more confidence in his work. Goes back to WWE, now he's on top. You know what I mean? So, like, to me, like I said, we want to teach the core values of professional wrestling that have sustained the business for a century. From the beginning of time to now. It still works.
That is interesting. Drew McIntyre, I tried to think of other examples off the top of my head, and I couldn't come with it right off the top. But there have been examples in the past where individuals have done similar things and gone away and gotten what I'm going to use the phrase, better rounded education in professional wrestling, and then came back and were able to succeed. If I could, I would like to kind of backtrack a little bit. You mentioned the in-ring aspect. You mentioned that you often start people out taking bumps, and the standard bumps and that sort of thing. And I was curious, you mentioned that you get to that relatively quickly in the training process. Is that something you feel is vitally important, or is it just about maybe weeding out those who don't really have the commitment they should to become a professional wrestler?
Yeah, it's vital to the overall process, because basically what we're doing is we're teaching them body control in the beginning. We're teaching them how to control their own bodies. All these bumps I'm talking about that they do these bumps on their own. There's no one around them. There's no one helping them. We hey, this is how you do it. Do it yourself, kind of thing. We correct them. We try to get them as polished and as good as we can. But they spend the first, I'd say, 2 months, just learning, bumps. And those bumps on how to do on their own. Like I said, it's all body control, and it's all up to them, right? And then once they've learned how to control their body and not hurt themselves, then we let them touch another person. So, and it's nothing major, but that's when we teach them how to lock up. And then we start teaching chain wrestling. And chain wrestling, to me, also is another thing that, for the core of the business, you have to have that. You have to have that arrow in your quiver. You understand? There's not enough guys that really know how to do good chain wrestling anymore. They know all these fancy holds and moves and transitions and things like that, but they don't know how to make them mean anything. So when we teach chain wrestling, from that point, the students, every day when they come in, they'll do all their bumps and then they'll chain wrestle, right? They'll do that every day they ever train with me, because those are the two things that, once you learn how to do those two things, you're pretty much set in wrestling. You understand? Like, once you learn how to do that, you could do just about anything. You know what I mean? I'm not asking anyone to do a corkscrew 450 off the top. You know what I mean? If they can, that's amazing. We'll work on it. But for the most part, I want people to lock up. Motley Cruz, who I know you know very well. He was a mainstay around this area, and a lot of his training methods are my training methods now. And one of the things he taught us was, hey, when you lock up like two bulls. You know what I mean? Because if a promoter is watching, or if anybody's watching, and you have a weak lockup, then they're going to turn off, or they're going to be disinterested and stuff like that. So we really try to emphasize, hey, this is it. Lock up, boom, and just little things like that. So everything should mean something, So with the bumps and things like that, it's all designed to teach them a specific aspect of professional wrestling and how to protect themselves and their opponent.
Okay, well, there you got into something that seems rather important, and I'd like to emphasize a little bit. You were describing how they spent much of their beginning stages doing things by themselves. And it's something that I don't think, we mentioned this in previous podcasts, where the public at large does not necessarily appreciate the risk of injury and the physical pain and risk that people are taking by being in the ring. And so it seems interesting. It got my attention. Let me say that. The doing it by yourself, is that really to say, hey, we've got to make sure you can do what you're supposed to do correctly so that you don't risk the safety of someone else you're in the ring with? Is that fair?
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, we'll just take one as an example. We teach everyone how to do a front flip bump. Okay. That front flip bump is used in a variety of different moves. Let's say hip toss, for example. Now, I could teach someone a hip toss the first day probably, but if they don't know how to take that bump on their own by themselves to protect themselves, then if I go to give them a hip toss, they could over rotate, or they could put their elbows down, or they could do something where they break their collarbone, or they land on their ass and break their coccyx, their tailbone, as Gorilla Monsoon would probably say, right? They could do that, or worse, they could undershoot their jump and actually go into my knee and blow my knee out and end my career, right? So that's why we teach these things by themselves first. Them hurting themselves is a hell of a motivator in the beginning. You understand? Professional wrestling hurts no matter how you do it, but it hurts a lot less when you do it correctly, right? And that's what I tell everybody. Everything hurts, but like I've had guys bump wrong, and then they bump right, and I go, which one feels better? And they go, oh, that one. I go, we'll do that every time. You know what I mean? And, you've seen me pretty much my whole career too. There's very little things that I don't land flat on, or I don't land correctly on, or things like that. Now things happen. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, for the most part, I've been pretty safe and pretty well taken care of. And that's what we're trying to teach them. Hey, control your body, be safe, and you'll be able to have, a 20-year career instead of a 10-year career,
All right. If I could, I would like to, let me just change this. You mentioned about trainers and how you select one, and I'm curious. You're going with big name, people who've been successful, or big names. Looking for big names. Is that something that you think is a good idea, bad idea? Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that one's a little bit of a mixed bag. So let me explain. Like, if you walk into, I'm not going to use anyone's real, I'm not going to use like an actual trainer from that, but if you walked in and said, hey, I was trained by Luthez, right? That would get your attention. Like, oh, wow, he was trained by Luthez. Luthez is awesome, a great professional wrestler. He must know what he's doing, right? So, yes, it's good from a business aspect to be able to contact promoters and say, hey, I was trained by this guy. The problem I have with this is what we're running into is a lot of the named trainers, the guys that actually have a big name value, in my opinion, they're shortchanging the guys that they're training. They charge thousands and thousands of dollars for a 2 or 3 month program, and once that 2 or 3 month program is done, they kind of just let them loose and like, okay, yeah, you're trained, go get trained. Now, like I've already said, it takes me 6 months to a year to get someone ring ready. And from most trainers that I've talked to, that is a standard kind of thing. Like, that's what it takes. Even in the old days, you would train, but then you would get in the car with the old veteran and you guys would ride town to town and he would polish you up. So the whole thing took about 2 or 3 years. And honestly, that's kind of still what it is. Cause like I said, it takes me 6 months a year to get you ring ready. Then you start working for the company and I start polishing things out. And it gets about 2-3 years before I would actually trust you to go off on your own and do whatever you want to do, right? I think I gave you enough information, enough knowledge, and you can make decisions for yourself and go do that. But now here we have named trainers that are doing it in 3 months. How is that even possible, right? So just be leery of named trainers that are trying to, it's like Coke and Pepsi. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, Coke and Pepsi is great, but, Sam's Cola tastes pretty good too. You know what I mean? And it's half the price. So like, and a lot of these bottling companies and things like that, when they do stuff like that, it's actually the same product, just in a different thing. Like, a lot of these guys have a lot of knowledge and they've been a lot of places, and that's great, but I'll put my professional wrestling knowledge against anyone else in the business, bar none. You know what I mean? We can sit and talk and go back and forth all day long. So I just want everybody to make the right decision for themselves. When you come to someone like me, like a lot of these kids are, I start training kids at 15 with parental consent, obviously. And I treat them like my own kids. I'm almost 40 years old. My oldest kid is 13 years old now. So like when they come to me at 15, I treat them like my own kid. I actually care about them and want to take care of them. So, and most people, they're probably just trying to take money. Same thing with a lot of the guys that are that shouldn't be training guys. Guys that that can barely put a match together, but all of a sudden they're training other guys. It's a vicious cycle. Guys that never learned how to work and never learned how to get over, teaching other guys how not to work and not get over. Blind leading the blind, as we've said many times. So here we are again at the 30-minute mark. It's behind us. The 30-minute mark is back behind us. But Mark Tipton, is there any last thing you'd like to add?
Well, I guess as a quick kind of sum up, one thing that comes to my mind is we talked about how there is a set program for some training that some trainers use. As sort of an overview, does the learning ever stop? Truly stop for a professional wrestler?
No, absolutely not. Like even now, 20 years, own company, promoter, booker, wrestler, trainer, the whole thing. I still watch hours and hours of footage every week, learning something, picking things apart. And hey, what about this? What about that? I listen to podcasts. Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, Arn Anderson, guys that I always idolize, and to me, some of the best minds in professional wrestling history. I listen to those guys, and I learn things. So, like, yeah, the learning and the training never stops, and that's why you guys need to listen to the 30-minute Midas Touch every week. And once again, I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. For my co-host, the Walking Miracle, Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.